Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Good. I'm sure you stayed up all late last night and watched all day and watched the convention, so you know everything we need to know about the Democratic Convention.
Well, thankfully there's the internet, so I was...
yeah, I don't think I could sit through all of that. But nevertheless, important things are happening. We're picking the next leader of the free world, if we could only keep it free. But you know, the subject that we want to talk about is a little bit about the convention, and I think it's very important, and the title is just Who is the War Party? And of course, that's what we spend a lot of time on, war and peace, and we always hope that there's more peace seekers than war seekers. And I've always worked on the assumption that generally, who makes a credible case for peace generally wins over the one that makes war. Just think of how LBJ and the Goldwater thing went. You know, one was war, and at least that portrayed as war, and the other one, of course, was for peace. And the same thing with Nixon in '68. He was thought to be the peace candidate. So that's generally the case. As a matter of fact, just the most recent, when Obama was supposed to be the peace candidate, but it never seems to work that way. So, but we have a bigger challenge now, just figuring out who is the peace candidate. Traditionally, most people think Democrats are more peace-oriented and less hawkish than the Republicans. And the Republican Party sometimes are very proud of being the war party. I saw a short clip on TV, matter of fact, it might have been this morning, and they were really complaining that the Republicans aren't military enough, and that's and they need to be more military, and the Democrats are too military. Well, we have to deal with that because right now, we had an interesting thing happen last night, and we're going to show a clip on this, and that has to do with Panetta's statement, and I understand we got some booze. He got some booze from that. So let's see if we could run that clip right now.
And he praises dictators from Saddam Hussein to Vladimir Putin. Today,
well, go ahead. Make a comment about that, Daniel.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is the part where former CIA director, former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, who himself made, I think, something like $700,000 doing speeches for defense contractors, and now he's trying to burnish Hillary's war credentials. And he had a rude awakening because, as you could see, he was drowned out by chants of no more war. And I think, to me, that's just a watershed moment. It was incredible, the look on his face. How could you be doing this to me?
Yes. And Hillary, even though a lot of Democrats don't know it, is hardly the peace candidate, and they still think she's a liberal in the sense and a progressive, but more so, the Sanders campaign certainly helped out on this. So I think this is very, very positive, what's happening here, because even within the confines of the Democratic Convention, the peace candidate was alive and well. So I think this to me is really a significant event that we are watching. But to figure out exactly who was the peace candidates, is it going to be Donald Trump? You know, Donald Trump, of course, he's being criticized by the Democrats because he has said, you know, we want to get rid of NATO. I don't happen to know where he stands on a lot of that, because one minute, you know, it sounds good, and the next minute he's ready to drop bombs on anybody and everybody. So I think that is the big dilemma. And Republicans, you know, really don't like to be seen as less militant, you know, than Democrats. Yeah. I want to just read one quote from a speaker for Paul Ryan, because it sort of tells you the split in the Republican Party. We saw the split in the Democratic Party between the hawks, and the neocons that control Hillary versus those thousands of people who are with Sanders and would like to see a different foreign policy. But the spokesman for Paul Ryan says Russia is a global menace led by a devious thug, and Putin should stay out of this election. That's rather ironic. If you understand, our own involvement in other people's elections.
Sure, the U.S. should have stayed out of the elections in Ukraine where they had someone elected and we helped overthrow. How many elections worldwide does the U.S. manipulate? So, the hypocrisy is so thick. But what he's trying to say is that these leaks from the DNC showing how they colluded to keep Sanders down came straight from Russia. And, of course, this is what the Democrats have been saying. This is all from Putin. It's all from Putin. Putin wants Trump. It's kind of a psychological operation to manipulate people into thinking that he's a tool of a foreign power. However, when you look for the evidence that this happened, there's very, very little. Even the Democrats said, well, there are experts. But, there was a firm, a cybersecurity firm hired by the DNC to investigate this, and they concluded that it was probably Russia. But if you look at the guy who founded this firm, he is a senior fellow at a NATO affiliated, the Atlantic Council, which is super pro-NATO, funded by NATO, and crazed in their hatred of Russia. So there's hardly an unbiased view.
Yeah, and I think this email deal is getting to be very, very interesting, too, because Trump has the Democrats on the defense. He's saying, well, just release these emails now. And the Democrats go nuts and say, oh, he's advocating espionage against our country. No, he's saying that if Hillary was so careless that important information was taken by the Russians, that we ought to know about it. And he's just making a suggestion. Of course, they went nuts and had to try to gain the upper hand on this and saying, well, he's advocating espionage against his own country. And yet, in a way, I'm not so sure. They say it's true that the Russians have this, and they say they are sort of sympathetic and they don't like Hillary because they represent militancy around their country. But just like the United States is hesitant sometimes to reveal what they have because they don't want to know what their abilities are. So if the Soviets, Russians had ability to get every email to DNC, I'm not so sure they're going to be willing to do this. So I think this back and forth serves, the benefits of Trump and certainly makes the Democrats look terrible. It shows the people, the progressives in the Democratic Party, that, even on philosophy, especially on foreign policy, you can't trust Hillary.
And it also shows the hypocrisy of the people in the Democratic Party who scream about the Russians the Russians monitoring our things and stealing our secrets. When under President Obama, we were even listening into the cell phone of Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, our wonderful ally. But one thing about Ryan that's interesting, this quote is very bellicose. But here's something interesting that I think should also hearten us, just like the booing and the chants during Panetta, is that Ryan is in trouble politically. His seat is by no means assured, and he's being challenged by someone with some libertarian viewpoints that I think you're familiar with. So people are sick of this warmongering even in his own district.
Yeah, and it might be even better than I thought because, we don't hear from them. They're not on the news. I don't think they covered this little deal with Panetta, did they, in the news?
Politico had a whole article about Panetta's speech. They did not once mention that he was interrupted.
So maybe Paul Ryan is sleeping on the job, and some good will come of it because the average person doesn't seem to be interested in this. But it may be that the media is not telling us they're interested in it, and they may well consider this very important. I think that, like I said, I thought Trump was benefiting by this. I just wished I had more assurance. When they say, oh, he's going to get rid of NATO, I sure wish he would. Yeah. But the next day, I'm afraid he's going to say, let's send a bill to NATO and we'll go and do the bombing and we're going to start immediately and we're doing it too quickly. So that sort of neutralizes. But I just think that the real sleeper issue is how hawkish the Democratic Party really is. I mean, when you look at Madeleine Albright, she's been around. She's got a major speech. She gave a major speech to this. And just think of the things that she was involved in. Remember her little statement she made about when she was challenged that 500,000 children died with our policies in Iraq, and it didn't bother her. And then they wonder why the Middle East, many people in the Middle East sort of resent us. But she is very, very hawkish, and she's super for Hillary. But I've been pretty cynical about this whole thing. I'm still very cynical. Yeah. I think the neocons and the media and the government's in charge. So let's say Paul Ryan loses. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's going to stop the hawks at all. And I think that they're there. And since both sides advocate a similar policy, what I think the argument is about is technical things, which country you hit, how you hit them, who has the power, who makes the money in the military-industrial complex, who gets the credits, who gets involved, in finances. I think that's what it's all about. I remember that big argument they had about helicopters. The big debate in Colombia was which company got to sell the most helicopters, and American citizens, the average person, didn't give a hoot, and they didn't even have the chance to offer it, and nobody paid enough attention to say, why are we giving Colombia any helicopters? So I think it's a power struggle, and it's interesting. The power struggle is not Republican and Democrat. It's two factions in the Democratic Party, and there's two factions in the Republican Party, and Trump is one faction against the more establishment faction, and I think it'll be interesting to see how this all turns out.
And I think even though I know you've been very skeptical and critical of Trump in the past, and still are, but I think it's worth mentioning when he says something that's right, and that's, for one, he said, this is the thing that drove the Democrats crazy. He said, I don't see why we can't get along with the Russians, with Russia. And they went crazy over it. That seems like a normal statement. And here's what Panetta said. We can't afford someone who would withdraw from the world. This is this sort of Manichaean zero-sum view of the world, that if somehow the U.S. military wasn't involved overseas, that means that the U.S. is not involved. Well, what about tourists? What about business people? We're not even allowed to do business with places like Russia because they put sanctions on. And it's this view that if it's not the U.S. military and the U.S. government involved, then there's no involvement.
Yeah, and one charge against Trump by I think it was Panetta, was he would get rid of all the treaties. I've been trying to get rid of all the treaties all along. I wish there was a chance of that, but that is not likely to happen. But the other thing is that they said that it doesn't represent our moral principles, to stay in there and get very involved in the media, and get very involved in what they're doing.
It violates our principles.
Yeah, so... Okay, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Today, we're certainly looking at this from an angle of who is the war party? And the war party, obviously, is unknown. There's a war faction out there. There are the neoconservatives, the military-industrial complex, the big bankers, and the people that I think don't have a moral imperative of working toward peace. I think there's gratefully, we can find some peace-loving people in this country. I thought it was great that they were shouting their sentiments at the Democratic conventions. We haven't had that in the Republican conventions. They're still shouting more, and they want to use this to show that the Democrats are too weak and that even talking to the Soviets. Just think of what we did in the past when Kennedy talked to Khrushchev at the height of the Cold War. And now they're claiming that Putin is a thug equal to that kind of a threat. And we're not even supposed to talk to him. And we've seen some improvement, of course, with relationships with Cuba and over the years with China. And the hawks would never admit it, but actually things have been improved with Iran. So there's no reason why we can't talk to people. We're not at the point where we can't talk, and yet there's all this shouting of, Putin is a thug and he's the worst guy in the world, and therefore we're not allowed to do this. I think The peace movement is alive and well. I'd like to see more work put together by progressive Democrats that are honestly seeking peace, and those libertarian conservatives who see no purpose in all this infighting and supporting the military and industrial complex. There is an element in the Republican Party that agree with this principle. It's just that they don't have much of a voice. Within the party, they're excluded or ridiculed. They certainly wouldn't have a leadership role in the Congress. And the media is on the part, not of the Democrats alone for their militancy. They're on the side of militancy. There's very, very few comments made on left or right stations on TV supporting peace. I want to thank everybody today for tuning into the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.